Hello vinyl community, Mark here again from Sound Matters, talking all things vinyl and music. I'm here with a bit of a fun one today. We're going to talk about the best classic rock albums to add to your collection if you don't already own these already. These are some huge albums. This is all a little bit of fun. You know, at the end of the day, if I ask 10 different people what their top 10 classic rock albums would be, you'd get 10 completely different lists. So I want to go through my picks for today and then turn it over to you in the comments to give me your top classic rock albums that you think should be in every single collection. Essential classic rock albums that you think have defined the genre and pushed the boundaries of music forward. So without further ado, let's get straight into the list. First on the list, and we're starting big here, and this actually comes from a list that I compiled over on my website, and I really enjoyed putting this list together because I guess classic rock is kind of my home music-wise. I kind of grew up with all of this stuff, and I'm going to go big with Sgt. Pepper's. I think this is an era-defining and a genre kind of building album, and I think really needs to be on any list of the best classic rock albums. Some say that classic rock started with the Beatles and ended with Nirvana, but I think that's a bit of a strange statement. I can't quite classify personally Nirvana as being classic rock, but hey, there you go. That just demonstrates how many people feel differently about how you define genres, and perhaps to a degree it depends on when you were born and how old you are and your own musical kind of compass and kind of, perspective. But anyway, Sgt. Pepper's. Following a 3-month hiatus and rumours of an imminent split, the Beatles set out to produce their most ambitious album yet. Sgt. Pepper's is a loose concept album, of course, around a fictitious band. Many consider the album to be one of the earliest concept albums, with its multitude of influences and experimental production techniques, and the art-inspired album cover, of course. The Beatles paved the way, I believe, for progressive rock. The album is considered to be a watershed moment, I think quite rightly, in popular music culture. To understand the direction of rock and to understand the remainder of the 20th century and how things progress, I think you really must first understand Sgt. Pepper's. If you can, I would seek out a mono and a stereo copy of this album to fully appreciate how different the two mixes are. And of course, one of the really cool things about this album, and specifically owning it on vinyl, is the final track, how it ends with that endless locked groove on A Day in the Life. It just really lends itself to the vinyl format, and I think is an album that should grace any music lover's collection. Next on the list is another big one. It's Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, another classic Abbey Road production, of course. Now, this one is just so iconic, it's almost become a cliche, but I think, cliches and kind of things become bigger than, and become household names, I guess, for a reason. And I think undoubtedly, rightly so, it has that place in music history because of its iconic status in terms of the album artwork, but not only just that, but it's the timeless concepts and the production behind the album, the experimental production that really moved, I guess, the genre forward. It rightly has a place, I believe, in music history. Similarly to Sgt. Pepper's, Dark Side of the Moon is a superb example of an album that walks the line between progressive concept albums and that popular appeal that makes it have appeal with the masses. The tracks flow seamlessly into each other, creating a sonic journey while also exploring themes of life, death, and mental illness. A sonic signature of the album is the extensive use of tape loops, vocal commentary samples, of course, and the relatively new at the time EMS Synthy AKS modular synthesizer, which became widely used on many progressive rock albums. Original Harvest pressings of the album will set you back over $300 for a copy in good condition. Repressings vary in sound quality and may not quite be measuring up to those 1973 copies. That said, the new 50th anniversary edition is, fairly new. It's, I think, over a year old now, but that is said to compare very well with the original. Next on the list is Yes, Fragile, which saw the band take on keyboardist Rick Wakeman, setting out the pathway for 3 consecutive classic rock albums. In this album, Fragile, but then also Close to the Edge and Tales from Topographic Oceans, all of which are well worth picking up on vinyl and are absolute classics. Fragile is arguably the more accessible of the three, containing a more conventional rock album structure compared to the more meandering and bombastic follow-up albums. If you're new to Yes, I would say start with Fragile and work your way from there, in my personal humble opinion. Track highlights include the opening track, Roundabout, one of Yes's best known songs, and then there's of course Mood for a Day, Steve Howe's beautiful Spanish guitar solo of course, and then the epic final track, Heart of the Sunrise, which aptly sets the scene, I think, for the following album, Close to the Edge. Next up, Electric Ladyland. Electric Ladyland is the final studio album from the Jimi Hendrix Experience, and arguably, I would say, their best work laid down on tape. Electric Ladyland really showcased Jimi Hendrix's versatility, including a wide range of styles from psychedelic rock to R&B, slow blues jams, and elements of funk. The 15-minute slow blues jam, Voodoo Child, is a particularly stunning display of raw musicianship, while the blistering rendition of Bob Dylan's All Along the Watchtower is so good that it receives praise from Dylan himself. And the list goes on, from the undeniable swagger of Crosstown Traffic to the Guitar Hero Wah Wah showcase of Voodoo Child, Slight Return, and even the 60s British invasion sound of tracks like Little Miss Strange. Electric Ladyland just keeps on giving from beginning to end. Vinyl copies of the original band album cover will fetch a pretty penny, but modern day repressings are of course very easy to obtain and affordable. This next one I don't think could escape this list at all. It's of course Fleetwood Mac Rumours, which remains one of the biggest selling albums of all time. The well-documented, fiery personal relationship issues that dominated the recording sessions created the perfect conditions for passionate songwriting that resonated with millions across the globe. As a complete body of work, Rumours is an exemplary example of how to master the craft of making a hit record. It has literally everything, from highly relatable lyrics to perfect harmonies, polished production, and even some blistering guitar solos to boot. Fleetwood Mac's most celebrated album has something, I believe, for everyone. Next up, Queen, A Night at the Opera, which definitely elevated this band to global rock stardom. And despite the fact that the band were essentially broke at the time due to unfavourable contract deals with their record company, this album was, at the time, one of the most expensive records ever made. Unlike their previous album, Sheer Heart Attack, which was recorded on a 16-track tape machine, A Night at the Opera utilised a 24-track tape machine. Such a setup in recording tech definitely facilitated the eclectic range of instruments used across the album, and of course the ambitious, layered trademark vocal and guitar harmonies that are now synonymous with the band's work. Frequently hailed as one of the greatest albums of all time, A Night at the Opera is an essential classic rock album. Moving on, we have Sticky Fingers, which is arguably one of the best Rolling Stones albums ever recorded, not only for the classic music, but also, of course, the absolutely iconic album cover. Collectors will want to seek out an original pressing with the working zipper, an Andy Warhol classic featuring the mystery man in jeans, and the zip revealed the image of underwear on the inside of the gatefold. Sticky Fingers is also the first Stones album to feature new guitarist Mick Taylor, new at the time of course, replacing Brian Jones, who died 2 years prior. Next is the self-titled album from the Kings of Acid Rock, The Doors. Now, if you can find a VMP copy of this from 2021, there may be a few hovering about on eBay or Amazon, then you can look forward to a nice mono reissue mastered by Bruce Botnick and also cut by Bernie Goodman. I think the thing sounds really, really good. But The Doors influenced a generation with their eclectic self-titled masterpiece. The performances and lyrics are still able to resonate with people today, from the pulsating opening track of Break On Through to the Other Side to the Eastern-inspired closing track, The End. The Doors is essential listening for any true classic rock fan. Widely considered as the forebears of heavy metal, Black Sabbath, Paranoid gives us some early clues as to the trajectory of rock music going forward. It was a watershed moment where rock music started to transition into heavier, more dissonant territory. Paranoid was recorded in quick succession after the success of their self-titled album. It departs further from the Zeppelin-esque heavy blues sound of their earlier work, building on the darker sound of tracks like Black Sabbath and NIB. Most now regard this as one of the earliest examples of heavy metal and is a key influence in the development of the metal genre. Another album that I don't think can escape any classic rock albums list is Led Zepp 4, and it's of course best known for the epic and ubiquitous Stairway to Heaven, but it's an absolutely classic album from start to finish and remains one of the best-selling albums of all time. The band opted for the more informal recording environment of Headley Grange, based in England, to help inspire the broader range of styles, and they enlisted Andy Jones as the engineer who had finished work on Sticky Fingers at the time. Utilising the Rolling Stones' mobile recording studio enabled a more informal location, which produced some of the interesting results. One example can be heard on, of course, When the Levee Breaks, the drums of which were recorded in the building's lobby using a pair of microphones hung up a flight of stairs, and the result is one of the most iconic drum sounds in rock history. Another absolute classic is Ziggy Stardust, of course, by David Bowie, which is a loose concept album based on a fictitious androgynous rock star character of the same name, of course, Ziggy Stardust. He's sent to Earth before an apocalyptic moment, and after winning the hearts of fans, he eventually falls from grace due to his own ego. The concept and musicality of Ziggy Stardust received critical acclaim and is now considered one of the greatest classic rock albums of all time, and rightly so. In 2017, the Library of Congress deemed the album worthy of preservation in the National Recording Registry for its historical and cultural significance. Iggy Pop, the Velvet Underground, and Mark Bolan are among the musical influences of this rock opera. Having partly inspired Ziggy Stardust, it seems right to include T.Rex, Electric Warrior, of course, Mark Bolan's band. Now, this is often, I think, a very overlooked 1970s classic because, in part, Mark Bolan's T.Rex never went on to have the same commercial success in the United States as David Bowie did, which was much to Mark's I think frustration at the time. But in the UK, of course, this was a huge album. Mark Bolan's cult legacy and impact on rock history, however, I think is undeniable. In the early 70s, T.Rex gained popularity in the UK comparable to the Beatles, becoming one of the most significant figures of the glam rock movement. Electric Warrior saw the band transition fully away from their earlier psychedelic folk style, triggering a run of 3 albums that marked the height of their career and an influence undoubtedly on so many future bands and artists. Next up, the Eagles' Hotel California, which incidentally was released, I think, very similar time to Fleetwood Mac's Rumours, and is another album that makes that best-selling albums of all time list. Actually, the album was up for a Grammy at the same time for an Album of the Year award as Rumours, and was just picked to the post by said Rumours album. The album is the first to feature guitarist Joe Walsh, who had replaced Bernie Leadon, and this drove the band away from some of Leadon's country influence. The iconic album cover is a stunning gatefold consisting of the iconic sunset shot of the Beverly Hills Hotel. All round, Hotel California is easily one of the best classic rock albums, I think, of the 1970s. Up next on my list is The Who, Who's Next. Now, this album was initially intended to be a futuristic rock opera called Lifehouse, but it never came to fruition. It was Pete Townshend's concept, but it never came to fruition due to clashes with the band's management. 8 out of 9 songs on Who's Next are from the Lifehouse project, and the remainder of the unrealised concept album has since materialised on other albums. The iconic singles, of course, Won't Get Fooled Again, Baba O'Reilly, and Behind Blue Eyes helped make the album a huge success. With this next album, we venture to 1980 with AC/DC Back in Black. The band were riding the success of the album Highway to Hell when their lead singer Bon Scott went on a drinking session that would sadly take his life. Back in Black would see Brian Johnson take up the helm on vocals in the fallout of Scott's tragic death. Flying in the face of adversity, Back in Black became one of the most successful albums of the band's career and a true rock classic at the turn of the decade. Stepping back to the 1970s, 1975's Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen, which is considered, of course, Springsteen's breakthrough album that enabled the New Jersey icon to build a platform of which he had, of course, a monumentally successful career. The album peaked at number 3 in the Billboard charts and even re-entered it 5 years later after the release of his 5th solo album, The River. The album is also noted for its Phil Spector-style wall of sound production. Allegedly, Springsteen wanted the album to sound like Roy Orbison singing Bob Dylan, produced by Spector. In that respect, many would argue that he hit the nail on the head. Speaking of Dylan, released the same year as said Born to Run album, Bob Dylan's Blood on the Tracks initially actually received very mixed reviews from critics. Like a fine wine, the album appears to have gotten better with age, as critics and fans now widely consider the album one of Dylan's finest. Dylan had initially planned to record the album with an electric backing band, but eventually changed his mind and instead opted for a stripped-down acoustic approach. The eventual final recording sessions were famously off the cuff, if you like, and spontaneous and fast, with the engineer, Phil Ramone, later stating that Dylan would sometimes add or reduce several bars, eliminate a verse, or even add a chorus that you didn't even expect. For the next album, I want to add Neil Young, After the Gold Rush. Now, this album precedes 1972's Harvest, which easily could have made this list as an alternative. Unlike Harvest, which was recorded in the newly formed at the time Quadraphonic Sound Studios in Nashville, most of After the Gold Rush was recorded in a makeshift basement studio, which lends the album, I think, to its raw quality. A particular highlight is the raw and erratic guitar solo, for example, on Southern Man, something that really is a staple, I think, of the classic Neil Young guitar sound. Though Harvest would produce the #1 hit Heart of Gold, critics initially responded unfavourably, with some feeling that it was simply too similar to the songwriting and style of After the Gold Rush. Next is an album that I absolutely love. It's Santana Abraxas, which was a #1 hit album in the US and of course is very well known for the Latin-infused edition of the classic track Black Magic Woman. Carlos Santana decided to cover the song after seeing Peter Green perform at the Fillmore West in San Francisco. Like many of the albums on this list, Abraxas was actually selected as a culturally, historically, or artistically significant body of work by the Library of Congress and has since been preserved in their National Recording Registry. Final one on the list is Boston, and although classic rock has had many subgenres and kind of phases and eras, towards the end of the decade and into the early 80s, it eventually morphed into the kind of arena rock that we see from bands like Boston and Journey, among others, of course, as well. Boston is perhaps best known for the hit More Than a Feeling, the style of which gives some hint of the direction rock would take going into the 80s. The big, bold, bombastic, stadium-filling and larger-than-life sound. Counter movements such as the rise of punk were a direct reaction against this very mainstream and excessive direction of rock music at the time. Some love it, some hate it, but undoubtedly it's part of the rich tapestry of rock music over the decades and part of how the genre has evolved over time. So now, of course, it's over to you. Let me know what you think of my picks, but also let me know your choices down in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your list may vary wildly from mine based on your own experiences and preferences, and of course, how you define classic rock as an era or a genre. Some people would define classic rock, I guess, as the dominant rock culture that formed out of the disillusionment of the late 1960s kind of flower power type movement. But your mileage may vary. As I say, these are fantastic albums though to own on vinyl, as vinyl was the dominant format at the time, and if you can get those original pressings, it's nice to get that all analog beautiful experience. But thank you ever so much for watching. I really appreciate you sticking till the end here. If you'd like to support my channel further, you can do so using the discount codes in the description of this video. You can get money off vinyl gear from my partners and sponsors at no extra cost to you. I get a very small commission and I appreciate your support. You can also support me on Patreon for exclusive additional content, and I appreciate once again your support. If you're new to this channel, I would really appreciate if you give me a subscribe. I'd love to have you on my vinyl journey with you guys, but I will look forward to the next video now and just wish you well, enjoy the music, and I will see you then. Cheers.